Hi, Nancy. Welcome to Sarah's tent.
Hi, Sandy. Hey, before we start, I just wanted to make a correction. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about the meaning of the word dog in Hebrew, kelev, and
Mm-hmm.
I said it was like a heart, and that's wrong. It's all heart. So
Okay.
kol means all, lev means heart. So the lamed, the L sound is overlapping between those two words. And it means all heart, which actually is better because
Yeah.
dogs are all heart.
Yes.
So that's my
Okay.
little correction I wanted to say before we started.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nancy. And just want to welcome to anybody who will be listening to this later. Welcome to Sarah's tent. The flaps are always open because Sarah was very open to hospitality and kindness. And we have the candle lighted because a candle burned in her tent from Shabbat to Shabbat. So we are kind of as a backup or reminder of where we are. We are now in Genesis chapter 5. We just finished last week with Cain and his situation and consequences of his actions. So now we are beginning chapter 5 and moving on. So, Nancy, would you like to read a few verses there?
Yeah, so I'll read chapter 5, verse 1 through 4. I'm not going to read after that because it's mostly just names of people and how old they are when they died and when they had kids. So I'm just going to read the first four verses and then we can talk about it,
Okay.
talk about the whole thing.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. This is the account of the descendants of Adam on the day of the creating by God of man in the likeness of God. He made him. Male and female, he created them. He blessed them and called their name man or Adam on the day they were created. And Adam lived 30 and 100 years, and he begot in his likeness according to his image, and he called his name Seth. And they were the days of Adam after his begetting Seth, 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. We're going to stop there for now for reading because, like Nancy said, there is just verse after verse of this person lived this many years, had sons and daughters, and then they died. And I'm sure there's a lot of meaning in that we really don't have time, nor is that part of the scope of what we are doing tonight. But I'm sure there's a lot we could glean from that if we had the time to do that. There are a lot of names there, but the four that jumped out at me were Adam, Seth, Enoch, and Noah. What do you think about all those names, Nancy, and dates and lifespans?
Well, first of all, I guess it just never occurred to me until I just now read it. I didn't put it in my notes, but I just now read it in verse 4. We talk about Cain and Abel, and then we talk about Seth.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently, Adam and Hava had many sons and daughters,
Yeah.
and we don't have any information about them. And for some reason, I never noticed that before
No, I had not either.
because I just assumed that it was Seth who had sons and daughters. But no, he does. But it says that after Adam begets Seth, then he begets sons and daughters. So there, so my inquiring mind wants to know who are these sons and
Ah,
daughters, and
and how
why do we
many?
not? Yeah, and how many?
Many.
And we don't know anything about them. But anyway, yeah.
Interesting.
So, one thing that stands out to me in this list is that I think last week we had a listing of Cain's genealogy, the descendants of Cain. And
Right.
now we're switching gears, and these are the descendants of Seth. And we don't hear about descendants of Cain directly anymore. They might come
Yes.
up, but we don't have any listing of them in this list. So
Yes.
yes, through Seth in this line.
Yes, and I was just doing a general scan of these verses, and it seems like he chooses one person to say, this person begat that person by name. They lived this many years and then had sons and daughters, which are not mentioned. So it's like it's following one particular lineage. And we know it's bringing us down to eventually to Abraham. So I think this is the beginning of the lineage of Abraham and then his descendants. So there are lots of people they're just mentioned as sons and daughters, but there are the specific people who are singled out. And the thing that has always I've wondered about when it says he lived 900 and ever how many years, Methuselah was like almost 1,000 years. Is that a year the way we calculate a year, or is it a different? Does a year mean a year? 365 days. I've never really seen any commentary on that. I haven't looked that much for it, actually. Have you seen anything about when he says 900 years? Is it a 900 years like we would understand 900 years?
I have not heard any discussion on that, but I would assume it would be yes. And the reason that I assume it would be yes is because the purpose of the creation of the sun and the moon was to give us a calendar.
True. Yeah.
And so I think at that point, the calendar was established, and a day was a day, and a month was a month, and a year was a year. And just as a side note, the Jewish calendar follows lunar months and solar years. Is that right?
I think so. Lunar months. Yes, because, yes.
And so
Yeah.
sometimes there's like leap years or
Right.
extra month in their calendar.
Right.
But yeah, I think that a year meant a year.
And do you think, and this just popped into my head just now, especially here in chapter 5, they are still close to creation. And as we read in other chapters and they do genealogies again, their lifespans get shorter. Do you think there's any connection between the further away you get from creation that lifespans got shorter, or is that just kind of, well, that's too bizarre?
I think you're hit on something. I think this is just my own opinion. I haven't read anything about it, but I think that the lifespans were longer back then because the earth needed to be populated. And so
True.
people needed to have more children. And as the earth has become more populated already, then we don't need to live as long, maybe.
Got it. Got it. Well, and I don't want to upset anybody who eats meat, but which I do. Nancy's a vegetarian. I'm not a big meat eater, but I will eat meat. As you pointed out before, when Adam and Hava were created, they didn't eat meat. It was not until after Noah that they were given permission to eat meat. Have no idea if there's any connection there or not, if that had anything to do with it, but I'm just going to throw that out there. And maybe if somebody's listening to this can research that and contact us about it. So
Are you saying that vegetarians live longer than meat eaters?
I'm saying, is that a possibility? I mean, you've kind of got some scripture backup here for it.
Yeah, maybe
So
so.
anyway, I don't know. Maybe we're just being a little silly right now, but I've just always fascinated me that, can you imagine living 900 plus years?
No, I can't.
Just,
I
I
can't
can't.
imagine that.
I can't. It's just amazing. Um, Noah, Noah is one of the main names that, well, we've talked about Adam and Seth. Did you have anything on Enoch? He's one of the ones that is we kind of focus in on sometimes.
Well, yeah, Enoch is mentioned, and then as in the other verses that list the genealogy, it's just the name, and he begot him, and he lived this long. But for Enoch, it says, and Enoch walked with God after his begetting of Methuselah for 300 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And then a little bit later, it says, and Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more, for he took him, did God. So that's different than all of the other um, grammatical configurations where the person died
Yes.
at the end.
Yeah, it doesn't actually say that he died.
Right.
And I did look in Rashi because that has always been interesting to me. And if you bear with me just a couple of minutes, I'd like to read from Rashi's commentary on that, talking about Enoch, where it says, and Enoch walked with God. It says he was a righteous man, but light in his mind, that is, not firm enough in his convictions, so that he might regress to doing evil. Therefore, the Holy One, blessed is he, acted quickly and removed him from the world and put him to death before his time. This is why Scripture deviated from its standard phrasing regarding his death by writing, then he was no more in the world to fill out his years, for God had taken him before his time. So it's
Interesting.
like God did a preemptive step in there and took him while he was still a righteous man, rather than if he lived longer, he might not be a righteous person. It's kind of the way I'm understanding Rashi on that.
Well, that's very interesting. It certainly does give us a different point of view about people who die young.
Good point. But did he, another thing, and Rashi didn't comment on this, but another question that I had about him, where it says he was not, did his body just disappear?
Yeah,
It just says he was no more. So what happened?
right. What happened?
Yeah. Is he just, and how did the people, his family and people around him react? Like, he's no more. But maybe they were on a level that they understood what was happening. I don't know. There's just so much that we would love to have more detail. Hashem, explain this to me. What happened? What happened to his body?
Yes. Yeah. We just don't, we, meaning you and me,
Yeah.
just don't know yet. I'm sure that there are sages who might understand this better than us, but yeah, the simple reading of this, we don't have that much information. He just wasn't there anymore. They turned
Just,
around and whoop, where'd he go?
it made me think about Elijah, where he was taken up in, and I don't know if this is literal or if it's some kind of spiritual thing that happened, but just reading the plain reading of it, when Elijah died, the chariot came and he was taken away in a chariot, and Elisha saw that. Whatever that means, I don't know, but here's another person who evidently did not die the way we understand dying, but he was taken up and taken away. So maybe I don't know. Maybe I should stop speculating, but it's just fascinating to think that God looked at this person. And that tells me, too, that He looks at us individually. He saw this one person and said, I need to step in here and do something. And we're not just a, a crowd of people. We're to Hashem, we are individuals. And he knows us individually.
And he is involved in a personal daily relationship.
Yeah.
He's not some watchmaker who created the world and then left it to run by itself.
Yeah, exactly. And I like in verse 24, it says, Enoch walked with God. There's got to be depths and depths and depths of understanding how you walk with God, what all is involved in that. It's to me, it indicates a closeness, a unity. You walk with somebody, you're in step with them, you're going the same direction they are. So it's just so much in that phrase that he walked with God.
There's probably a study on that word walked with, holech, because in the Adam and Eve story, God's walking in the garden and
Right.
Adam and Hava hear him. So they were on that level with him too. So yeah, there's probably a lot deeper information about that particular word and what that means
Yeah,
on
I
a daily
think so.
basis.
I think so. And bringing up Adam and Hava, they heard him walking in the garden. Well, we know God doesn't have feet, he doesn't have legs. So walking obviously means something more than just physical taking steps with somebody. It's got to be more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
We'll keep an eye out on that to see if we can find anybody else
there you
who
go.
walked with
Okay.
God.
The next of the four names that I was most familiar with is reading this is Noah or Noach, if we want to say it Hebrew-ish, Noach. Um, I think you had read something you were going to bring up about what his name means. And that's another thing in Torah. Names mean something.
Yes.
Names were just not randomly selected because, oh, I want to name them after my favorite character in a book or something like that. The names meant something. And
Yes.
you found out Noah's name does mean something.
Yes. Names are important. As I was
Yes.
talking about the dog,
Yes.
names are important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Noah's name means rest or ease or relief. And it says he will provide us relief from the toil of our hands. This is in the commentary in our Humash that we're reading.
Okay.
And this was said prophetically in reference to the invention of farming tools, which was attributed to Noah. Until his time, in consequence of the curse decreed upon Adam, back in chapter 3, verse 18, the earth produced thorns and thistles when one planted wheat. So in the days of Noah, this ceased. So he came up with tools to make life a lot easier.
It's interesting. And I wonder what that means. The thorns and thistles ceased because we know we still have weeds and thorns and things like that today. So does it mean they actually ceased growing or they ceased having to work so hard to get rid of them because he had introduced a tool that would make that easier?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. Okay. The hard labor, well, it was probably still hard labor. Um, we think of the farm equipment we have today and air conditioned cabs and things like that. And that wasn't at all what he had. So it was still some hard work and sweat of, we learned from our Hebrew teacher Moshe, where it says sweat of the brow, it actually was sweat of the nose. So they still, I'm sure, were having to work by the sweat of their nose, but it was a little easier.
Right,
New,
right.
new technology had come on the scene.
Exactly. And his dad had predicted that by naming him
Yeah.
Noah.
Yeah, that's
Speaking of
interesting.
his dad's name is Lamech.
Mm-hmm.
And you might remember last week we had this story about Lamech, and he killed Cain and was cursed for 70 generations. That's a different guy.
Okay.
Other guy, the one that we read about last week, was in the line of Cain, and this Lamech is in the line of Seth.
Okay.
So sometimes you will see the same name. It's not necessarily the same person. So you
Right.
have to just kind of be aware of who is who, even though it's the same name.
Exactly. And and context is important. See what the
Right.
context is. And there's two names in this genealogy that we haven't done. We've got Enoch, but then we've got Enosh also. So those could easily be, I think we're saying the same thing. So this may be a shorter session in Sarah's tent tonight because we didn't want to read all of the genealogy. When anybody that's listening to this later would encourage you, if you're interested in reading it and looking at all the names and the length of their lifespans, it's in Genesis 5. And we are now introduced to Noah at the end of this chapter. Um, I'd always heard, Noah lived, I think it was 500 years, and he had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then one day I really was reading that and thinking about it, and I thought, how did he have three sons in 1 year? And I got to thinking, were they triplets? It had never occurred to me before that maybe they were triplets. And we
Maybe.
all, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said, maybe that's true. Yeah, triplet.
Maybe, yeah, maybe they were triplets. And we always say Shem, Ham, and Japheth, but actually Japheth was the oldest of the three. So I've always thought that was interesting why we say um, the oldest one last. Did you come across anything on that?
Well, I thought it was interesting that Noah was 500 years old when he had his first kids because everybody else was a lot younger.
Right,
500 is very old to start your family. I mean, even in this time,
right.
everybody else had their kids before then. And I guess we can talk about it next time as to why, because it does have to do with the flood,
Yes,
why he didn't have kids earlier than 500 years old.
yes.
Just a thought.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else from these verses, Nancy, that you would like to bring out?
Well, I I guess my closing thought would be just to think about how long people lived and their overlapping lifetimes.
Yes,
Because there's 10 generations between Adam and Noah. In our lifetime, if you think 10 generations, we don't know we've never met those people in the earlier generations.
right.
But Noah was only um, three, he had third hand knowledge of the creation of the world
Yeah, okay.
because there's only one person between Adam and Noah.
Yeah,
It could be his dad, Lamech. They overlapped. He overlapped with Adam, or it could be Methuselah. Methuselah overlapped with Adam. So Adam had the knowledge of the creation of the world, and then say Methuselah learned it from Adam, and then Noah learned it from Methuselah because they had overlapping lifetimes.
right.
That just blows my mind that people were that close to somebody who was there when the world was created. That just
And
blows me away.
it might be, we were asking earlier, we talked earlier about why did they live so long, and maybe that's another reason. So this knowledge could be handed down without a lot of gaps in it. So you had people who were still alive who experienced it telling people later. So maybe that was one of the reasons why we had these long lifespans, so those lives would overlap. Because we know
Yeah.
I'm sure when we were kids, I know we would play, we called it telephone, and you would whisper something in somebody's ear and it'd go around the room. And by the time it got around the circle, it wasn't anything at all like what it started out. So maybe this was one way to preserve the accuracy of. And I'd wondered this before, Nancy, and this is a little bit off topic. When Adam was and Hava were escorted out of the garden, did they remember their time in the garden? Did they remember what it was like to be in the garden? I don't know. I've never read anything on it, but did Adam remember how Hava was created? Did he remember any of that? So I don't know. Maybe just something to think about.
Yeah. It also makes me think because you said um, that it helps with the transmission of the story if people are closer together and hear the
Right.
story firsthand. Maybe it's something that the younger generation could think about, maybe talking to their elders more and asking them
Yes,
to tell the kids or the grandkids or the great grandkids stories of their life, because once those elders are gone, then we lose those stories from our elders.
exactly. It would be great. And we've got so much technology now. They could video it, and then you could show their great great grandchildren the videos of that. So that would
Yeah.
be good. Well, my final thoughts on it is we've got verses and verses and verses here and list generation after generation. And for most of them, all we know is they lived a long time and had sons and daughters. So, what was the real purpose of listing this when not that much is told about them? I mean, we've got the few that kind of jump out, like Noah and Seth and that, but most of them, it just says their name. They lived this many years, had sons and daughters, and then they died. So Torah doesn't just put things in to take up space. So there's got to be a purpose why all of this is here. Even though just on the surface it looks like there's not there's not a lot of information there.
Right. Because everything that's in the Torah, like you said, is for a purpose. And if it's not in there, if it's not in the Torah, then it's not important. But if it's in the Torah, then it's important.
Yes.
I just haven't learned that yet.
No, I haven't either. So we will leave it there for tonight. And next week, as a teaser for next week, we will learn more about Noah and his big adventure.
That's a good one. Yes.
Yes,
Noah's Big
his big
Adventure.
adventure. So, Nancy, as always, I enjoyed studying with you tonight, and I look forward to next week in Sarah's tent.
In Sarah's tent.
Okay.